Hi, my name is Annie Day. I'm part of the national tour to get organized for an actual revolution. And I want to invite you to be part of Zoom into the Revolution seminars on the New Year's statement from Bob Avakian. A new year, the urgent need for a radically new world, for the emancipation of all humanity. This statement, not only with its analysis of what we face, but especially with the revolutionary way out, represents something very special. It represents hope for humanity on a scientific basis. This New Year's statement provides the leading edge and the framework to wage a huge fight throughout society about what is the way out for humanity. This statement from Bob Avakian provides what humanity needs to understand reality, to understand the source of the problems that plague us, and why and how revolution, and only revolution, could provide a way out. A revolution based on the new communism developed by Bob Avakian, who's actively leading the movement for this revolution today. If after reading this statement yourself at revcom.us, if after hearing about it on the RNL, the Revolution Nothing Less show, if you're excited about this, if you see that there's really something radically different and very important here for people to get into, then I want to invite you to get more deeply into it, even if you still may have questions yourself. Sign up to be part of these Zoom into the Revolution seminars, where we're going to be discussing this statement. You can write to us at getorganizedforrevolutiontour@gmail.com, DM us on social media at the Revcoms, or go to revcom.us to find out more. Over a period of 4 sessions, we're going to go deeply into the content of the statement and the scientific method behind it. We're going to go back and forth with each other about it, sharpening our understanding. If you aren't sure you can commit to 4 sessions, then write to us with what you'd like to do. Do you want to be part of a one-time discussion based on this statement? Do you want to pull your friends and family together to get into this and someone from the tour can come on and lead a discussion? What kinds of panels and forums should be had based on this statement? How will this debate and discussion spread? Write to us. Now, a note for people who feel like this is too complex for them, who feel that they're intimidated by revolutionary theory, or who've been told their whole lives that it's not their place to understand things or to work with ideas. No. Those divisions arise from and are enforced by this oppressive system, the system that we're organizing to overthrow. And today we're living the future to bring that revolution into being. So that means breaking down these divisions that only some people can work with their minds and other people are just destined and determined to work with their backs. Everyone can understand things. And by coming together with our different levels of experience, we can learn from each other. We'll do supplementary sessions, reading out loud together. We can break down complicated concepts and terms together. And we'll learn from each other's questions, insights, and ideas on the basis of BA's scientific method in the statement itself. So we look forward to hearing from you. Now, I want to end this with a challenge and an invitation that's in the New Year's statement from Bob Avakian. And he ends by saying, quote, "In the face of this fascist juggernaut that's still threatening and gaining strength, large numbers of us who are deeply sickened and outraged by this, and who aspire to something much better, have raised and rallied to the call that science and truth matter and must be our guide. Let us now be brave enough and bold enough to apply this in an unhindered way, determined to seek the truth and follow the truth wherever it leads, overcoming all obstacles to this, including any cherished illusions or ingrained prejudices that run counter to reality and to scientifically established truth. Let us dare to act to make a reality of what science reveals as possible, a radically different and far better world and future for humanity." What you're about to see are the opening presentations for the Zoom into the Revolution seminars. First, you're going to hear from Noche Diaz, who's going to talk about the author of this New Year's statement, Bob Avakian, and why you should get into this and get into his body of work. Then you're going to hear from Tony Redtree, Lenny Wolf, and myself speaking to key themes of this New Year's statement.
All right, hello everybody. So to start us off, before we are diving right into the content of this New Year, New World statement, I wanted to take a minute to talk about the author, because sweeping and urgent and deeply scientific statement like this doesn't just pop out of an algorithm. This comes from a person, and Bob Avakian is the most important political thinker and leader in the world today. Now, that should sound controversial, and that should get you asking questions. And it's also true. And there's evidence to back it up if you pursue your questions. But first of all, you got to forget everything you know about leaders today. Okay, Bob Avakian is nothing like the politicians that we're told to look to for promises, and he's not developing a brand of activism. This is a completely different leader. And you can get a lot of the feel from this from the statement we're going to be, diving into and discussing a little bit more today. The analysis there is not sugar-coated at all. And the call for a radically new world, for the emancipation of all humanity, is not full of empty promises or reassurances that things will be all right or that we're really winning. BA is a revolutionary who bases himself on a scientific approach. And the struggle to apply that to society and the problems humanity faces is what has brought him to the understanding that this system must be finally overthrown through an organized struggle involving millions of people and replaced with a system that can meet the most fundamental needs of humanity and enables people to become fit caretakers of the earth. Now, why has he been doing this work? It's not just because he happens to be one of the good guys. Now, you can get a better picture of this in more full detail if you go into his memoir, which is available at revcom.us, where they're also featuring an article on Bob Avakian for the liberation of Black people and the emancipation of all humanity. And if you go there, you can see this goes way back, even as a youth, being influenced by the civil rights struggle. Even then, he didn't just stop at supporting the struggles against what was happening to Black people. He began to pursue why was this happening and what would it take to overcome this? And none of this was just automatic. It took work. It took struggle, including people who struggled with him. This is part of how he ended up working closely with the Black Panther Party in its very early days in the 1960s. In other words, before it was popular. And how he started pursuing whether a radical solution would be what is needed. Now, radical is something that's getting thrown around a lot these days by commentators to mean extreme or extremist or something like that, but it really just means to get to the root of something. So since then, and down to today, he has made the liberation of Black people a defining part of his life's commitment and work. And he has developed as a revolutionary communist and emerged as the foremost revolutionary leader and thinker in the world. This commitment has become even deeper and has been strongly interwoven with a dedication to the emancipation of all humanity from every form of oppression and exploitation. Now, I want to share with you in his own words what appears in the book, The New Communism, which again, you can get at revcom.us, where he answers this himself. He says, "Why was I doing the work I was doing? Once again, we're back to for whom and for what. I wasn't doing this work for myself. When I was young, in middle school, and then even more so in high school, my life got changed in a very major way by coming into contact with people I hadn't really known that much before, in particular, Black people. I started learning about their situation and how that relates to what goes on in society as a whole. I was drawn to the culture, not just the music and the art overall, but the whole way of going through the world of the Black people who became my friends and the world they introduced me to. And I came to the point of recognizing these are my people. Now, I knew they had a different life experience than I did, but these are my people. I don't see a separation. It's not like there are some people over there who are going through all this and somehow that's removed from me. These are my people. And then I began to recognize more deeply what people were being put through, the oppression they were constantly subjected to, the horrors of daily life, as well as the bigger ways in which the system came down on them. And as I went further through life and began to approach the question of what needs to be done about this, and was introduced to taking up a scientific approach to this, I realized that my people were more than this. I realized my people were Chicanos and other Latinos and other oppressed people in the US. They were the people in Vietnam and China. They were women. They were the oppressed and exploited of the world. And through some struggle and having to cast off some wrong thinking, I've learned that they are LGBT people as well. These are my people, the oppressed and exploited people of the world. They are suffering terribly, and something has to be done about this. So it is necessary to dig in and systematically take up the science that can show the way to put an end to all this and to bring something much better into being. You have to persevere and keep struggling to go forward in this way. And when you run into new problems or setbacks, you have to go more deeply into this rather than just putting it aside and giving up. So this is why I've been doing the work that I've been doing. Again, that's Bob Avakian in his own words, answering the question of why he's been doing the work he's been doing. So now, what does it matter that there's a person like this? Why is that important? And in case I haven't been clear, this is not just some badass 60s person that you never heard about who's been holding the fort and keeping the flame alive of the radical times. Yes, the influences of those times, what was accomplished and not accomplished, the obstacles people ran up against. It is important for people who want a better world. But even more so, BA came through all that and has continued to struggle ever since, to draw key lessons from struggles, not just here or at one time, but all around the world. Lessons which have been paid for in blood by people all around the world, yearning and fighting to be free. And because of this, he's been able to forge a way forward and develop a framework and method to enable that struggle to break through. This kind of leader, this kind of leadership, this is invigorating to anyone who wants to see an end to any and all forms of slavery and settle for nothing less than the emancipation of humanity. This is not just our thing or our brand that we're pushing. A leader like this has not existed in this country before. And the new communism is for anyone everywhere in the world who are questioning why things are the way they are and whether a different world is possible. Even if you just look at the last decade, we've seen, and many of us have taken part in, waves of struggle that filled lots of people with fire and hope, only to end up trapped within the very system that's causing the injustices that people were fighting. The Occupy movement, Ferguson with the police murder of Mike Brown that concentrated the police murder of Black people as well as others, the climate crisis, sexual assault against women, the repeated protests, what there were of them, against the fascism of Trump, Pence, and that whole regime, and the beautiful uprising recently for Black lives that followed the murder of George Floyd, just to name a few in this country. But for any of that to get somewhere fundamentally different, people are going to need to systematically take up the science that can show the way to put an end to all this, to bring something much better into being, as BA has said and done. So in this session, and going forward broadly in society, we do want people to appreciate, engage, and learn everything they can from the work BA has done, and particularly now what he's doing in this New Year, New World statement that we're getting into today. But we also want people to know, and they should know, who this is coming from and where he is struggling to lead things. This is why there are people like me, like us, who are working to take up and follow that leadership. And why in the Go Far tour, the Get Organized for a Natural Revolution tour, we're aiming to bring into being a movement of continually growing numbers of people who are becoming conscious and active followers of BA, building the revolutionary movement based on the new communism, which BA provides this kind of unprecedented leadership. So imagine with me, if even just thousands now were working with the same kind of heart and commitment that BA has shown, and that got forged together with the rigorous scientific approach that he had advanced with the new communism. People working to get at what is it actually going to take to make real a much better future for humanity. Think of the hope, scientifically grounded in real world possibility, that this could awaken even in those suffocated by the lack of hope. The inspiration and the challenge that this would pulse throughout society, and the much needed controversy and debate that this could spark over things that actually matter. So with that, I think we're just going to turn it right over to Tony, who's going to share some things with you.
A little bit of water first. So I think that gave us a real sense and feel for the leadership we have. And from here, we're going to kind of head into the statement itself. And I'm basically beginning with a question of scientific method and approach. A through line in this statement and in the method of BA, fundamental to the qualitative development of the new communism, is the principle that science matters and truth matters, especially to the problems facing humanity and their solution. Science and truth are essential to understanding where the world is heading now, under the domination of this capitalist and imperialist system, and the radically different direction it needs to and can take. Science is a method. Science is a tool for figuring out if something is true or not. It's a very powerful tool for understanding and transforming reality that can be taken up by anyone, including and especially for the people who have been locked out of science under this system. It's how humanity becomes ever more conscious and commanding participants in a process of getting beyond a world scarred by these kinds of divisions. Science applies to all material reality, not just to nature, but to human society. It's not only chemistry or math, it's about being able to understand the underlying and driving dynamics of human society and how to change it. Ardea Skybreak, a scientist trained in evolutionary biology and ecology, and an advocate for the new communism brought forward by BA, breaks this down in an interview titled Science and Revolution, which we'll show at the end. Whether you're talking about the material reality of a disease, of a natural ecosystem, or of a social system that human beings live under, science allows you to analyze its components, its history, how it came to be the way it is, what it's made of, what are its defining characteristics and underlying contradictoriness, and therefore also what is the basis for it to change or to be changed if your intent is to change it. Whether you want to cure a disease or make a better society, you need that scientific evidence-based process. So here I want to read several passages from BA's New Year's statement. Among many who have been outraged by the way Trump has consistently engaged in both pathological and purposeful lying, there has been a great deal of emphasis on the importance of science and truth, on facts and evidence-based reasoning. This is focused to a significant degree on the criminally anti-scientific approach that Trump and Pence have taken to the COVID-19 pandemic, and the encouragement of this anti-scientific madness among the fascist base and society at large, all of which has led to at least tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of unnecessary deaths, as well as unnecessary hardship and suffering for the masses of people. This emphasis on science and the scientific method is vitally important, but it is also necessary to emphasize the real need and great importance of being consistent with this and following scientifically determined truth wherever it leads in order to correctly understand reality in every sphere of life and society. What are the implications of this? That's end quote. What does this have to do with the people who hope to go back to some kind of normal and are inclined to only engage or embrace truths or ideas posing as truth, which make them comfortable, while rejecting, dismissing, or evading actual truth, which may shatter or challenge cherished beliefs or illusions people find all kinds of ways to hold on to? The contradiction that people on our side of a huge divide in society right now appreciate and believe in science, but don't extend that belief to human society at a time when the very future of humanity's existence is at risk, underscores, as BA says above, the great importance of being consistent and following scientifically determined truth wherever it leads, in order to correctly understand reality in every sphere of life and society. If you are new to this, we in this introduction to BA's statement and the seminars that will follow to collectively explore this, we begin with this challenge over method. Truth is not what confirms what you already know or feel. It's not simply believing what sounds like it makes sense, or that come from someone you know just said. The truth, as BA has said, does not depend on who says it or how it makes you feel. Because something comes from a source you like does not make it true. And because something comes from a source you do not like does not make it untrue. And truth is not a popularity contest. Because a lot of people believe something does not make it true. And because only a few people believe something does not make it untrue. Again, from the statement. One important dimension of this is rising above and repudiating, methodologically, the philosophical relativism of identity politics, which does a great deal of harm through its own version of reducing truth to partial, unsystematized experience and subjective sentiment, my truth or our truth, in opposition to real objective truth, which is correctly, scientifically arrived at through an evidence-based process to determine whether or not something, an idea, theory, assertion, etc., corresponds to actual material reality. While politically, this identity politics may be proceeding from a desire to oppose various forms of oppression, even if this is often characterized and vitiated by people of different identities seeking to claim ownership of opposition to oppression. In terms of epistemology, the approach to understanding reality and arriving at the truth of things, identity politics has a lot in common with the reliance on alternative facts, assertions that are in opposition to actual facts, often wildly so. That is actually the hallmark of the fascists. Even as it is important to recognize the political distinctions involved, the situation is far too serious and the stakes far too high to allow ourselves to fall into or conciliate with any form of opposing the scientific method and its pursuit of objective truth about actual reality, end quote. And that, to concur with my comrade Andy Z from the RNL show, is some sharp shit. Spitting truth at a method and way of going through the world that has currency these days, especially among woke and progressive people. And the double meaning of currency is intended here. So let's get into it in a beginning way in the chat Q&A, and let's get into it in a deeper way in the seminars that are to follow. And in doing so, let's go back to the beginning principle, that science matters and truth matters, especially to the problems facing humanity and their solution. Science and truth are essential to understanding where the world is heading now, under the domination of this capitalist and imperialist system, and the radically different direction it needs to and can take. So that's off to you, Lenny.
Okay. I'm going to focus on how that scientific method gets applied to the polarization in the society today by BA in the statement. Very early in the statement, BA makes the point that the polarization between Democrats and Republicans, as expressed through the electoral process in this country, involves contention over how to uphold and pursue the interests of the capitalist imperialist system and rule by the capitalist class. It does not represent the fundamental divisions in society and the world, nor the fundamental interests of the masses of people in the country or in the world as a whole. Nor can the profound problems confronting humanity be solved. In fact, they can only get worse within the confines of this murderously oppressive and exploitative system, and the chaos and destruction it will continue to unleash on a massive scale so long as it continues to dominate the world. He goes on to say, the electoral defeat of the Trump-Pence regime only buys some time, both in relation to the imminent danger posed by the fascism this regime represents, and more fundamentally in terms of the potentially existential crisis humanity is increasingly facing as a consequence of being bound to the dynamics of this system of capitalism imperialism. So the time there is must not be squandered, mired in oblivious individualism and political paralysis, or misspent on misdirected activity that only reinforces this system, which perpetuates endless horror for the masses of humanity and has brought things to the brink of very real catastrophe. Those are heavy statements on the situation we face. So let's let them sink in for a minute. So now I'm going to follow up on Tony's presentation on the scientific method by getting into how BA applies that method to the recent history of the US and the world, the problem we face, and then arrives at the conclusion I stated above. Let's start with this from the statement. To understand why we are confronted with the situation we are, it is necessary not merely to respond to, and in effect be whipped around by, what is happening on the surface at any given time, but to dig beneath the surface, to discover the underlying mainsprings and causes of things, and arrive at an understanding of the fundamental problem and the actual solution. This means coming to a scientific understanding that we are living under a system and what that system actually is, the system of capitalism imperialism. Working to grasp the deeper relations and dynamics of that system and how this is setting the framework for how different sections of society spontaneously think and react to events in society and the world, and what is the possible way forward to transforming all of this in the interests of the masses of humanity and ultimately humanity as a whole. Then he says, a crucial part of this scientific understanding of major changes resulting from the very dynamics and functioning of this system that have led to the upheaval and in society and have in significant ways fed this fascism. This is what we have to understand. Changes in the capitalist imperialist economy and correspondingly in the social structure and social composition within this country, as well as internationally, which have undermined traditional forms of oppression without, however, leading to the ending of this oppression, but establishing and enforcing it in new forms while provoking what is truly a deranged, sadistic, and often violent reaction on the part of the sectors of society who have identified their interests and in effect their very being with the traditional forms of oppression. Now, BA doesn't give you a superficial checklist, how to tell if your country is fascist or going fascist. This is an analysis of this society, which has the system, the worldwide system of capitalism, imperialism as its beating heart, 400 years of white supremacy running through its veins, and over 40 years of a fascist movement metastasizing throughout the entire society, including in the government itself. BA goes into what has happened to the situation of Black people, the situation of women, the breakdown in gender repression more generally, including LGBTQ people, and the reaction against that. The massive economic changes underneath and the upheavals, the intense rivalry between different imperialist powers, the massive crisis around the environment, increasingly asserting itself, and the rise internationally of fanatical religious fundamentalism, and how all this has led to where we are now. Here I have to say that nobody has done anything close to the work that Bob Avakian has done on fascism, not just on fascism actually, but on all these questions I mentioned and the way they interrelate and how to transform all this to get to a better world. He goes into the crucial and controversial question, for instance, on the link between fascism and white supremacy here and many other places, here in the statement and many other places in his work. And this flows out of a whole body of work and lifetime of experience on the systematic oppression of Black people, as Noche spoke to. The relationship of that to the need for and possibility of revolution in the United States as part of a world revolution, and how all that in turn relates to the emancipation of all humanity. So again, there's nothing close to this anywhere. It's not that there is not important work being done by others. There is. And BA draws on and learns from that work, including in this statement itself. But nowhere else is there the synthesis, or in other words, the comprehensive picture of how this works together and the dynamics underneath it and where it's headed, the possible pathways of development that we face in this situation, and what we must do about it to arrive at an end that's going to be good for humanity and not disastrous or even the end of humanity. Several years ago in a major speech, why we need an actual revolution and how we could really make revolution, BA pointed to, quote, the conflict between the sections of society upholding fascism and those opposing it from various perspectives, and how that conflict is shaping the terrain on which the struggle for revolution must be carried out. And further, how this conflict is likely to intensify and could erupt further in violent confrontation, close quote. A point borne out 2 years later, and especially on January 6th in the halls of Congress itself. BA explores the recent election in the light of this. He draws on the provocative insight of the Black columnist Leonard Pitts, who wrote that the recent election, quote, strips bare all the glossy claims about who we are as a country, underscoring the fact that in a meaningful sense, we are not one country at all anymore, but two sharing the same borders. And BA goes into Pitts's invocation of the Civil War in that regard. But the future we need cannot be a civil war between the fascists and the democratic imperialists, each of whom offer an idealized version of a past that, as BA points to in the statement, has never been anything but oppressive for the masses of people. And a war which in today's circumstances would be a one-sided genocidal slaughter. What we need is a genuine revolution, something that must be prepared for, and a real socialist state founded on the Constitution for that state, as authored by Bob Avakian. The future lies, he writes in the statement, not with the real or imagined past, but going forward to an actual socialist society and ultimately a communist world, where the fundamental orientation and practical policy are geared to meeting the material, intellectual, and cultural needs of the people, while giving increasing scope to individual initiative on the basis of and within the framework of the collective and cooperation foundation and ethos of society, where age-old economic and social relations of exploitation, inequality, and oppression are surpassed. And no longer does the well-being of some rest on the misery of others. This future society and the revolution required to bring it into being will be addressed next by Annie Day.
Thank you, Lenny. I want to remind people that after I speak, we're going to be taking questions and encourage people to ask questions about what they've heard so far, what they've read in the statement. And you can type that into the Q&A box. So this brings us to the final question, and I want to go back to the title of the statement. The urgent need for a radically new world for the emancipation of all humanity. BA opens the last section with a point that Tony emphasized, talking about the need to, quote, consistently apply the principle that science matters and truth matters, and therefore to seriously engage the scientific analysis, which I've outlined here, says BA about the statement, of the problem facing humanity and the solution. Where the world is heading now under the domination of this system and the radically different direction it needs to, sorry, I lost my place, and the radically different direction it needs to and can take. It calls for a willingness to apply this same approach, that science and scientifically determined truth matter, to communism and the historical experience of the communist movement, and in particular to the new communism, which has resulted from decades of work that I've carried out. This new communism, says BA, is a continuation of, but also represents a qualitative leap beyond, and in some important ways, a break with communist theory as it's been previously developed. Unlike those who slander and condemn or simply ignore communism and the historical experience of the communist movement, I myself have done and have led others in doing extensive, serious, scientific study, investigation, and analysis of the history of the communist movement and the socialist societies it has brought into being, end quote. Look, hundreds of millions of people were part of making these revolutions in socialist societies, forging whole new ways of living, whole new ways of relating, breaking centuries of tradition's chains. And yet this experience is blithely and endlessly dismissed, caricatured, slandered, and distorted. And to this, BA says, quote, here it has to be said, and can be readily demonstrated, that the liberal bourgeois attack on communism is, in its own way, as ludicrous and outrageous, crudely in violation of the scientific method and blatantly in opposition to the actual facts as the fascist mangling of truth, which the liberals are forever decrying. This does great harm to humanity. So think about that. And in opposition to all these surface level summations, swallowing the verdicts on communism, or alternately religiously upholding this experience without examination, BA went to work for decades. He looked at the actual facts. He looked at the underlying and driving dynamics of these revolutions. He studied why they made revolution in the first place, what contradictions they encountered, how they understood and dealt with these contradictions, what advances were made, what mistakes, even grievous mistakes, were made, and why. And why were they defeated? After the end of the first stage of communist revolution, BA was singular in the world in confronting the immensity of the loss and going deeply and, yes, scientifically to examine this experience so humanity can go forward. And the statement says, quote, drawing from this historical experience of the communist movement and a broad range of human endeavor, the new communism, as its defining method and approach, emphasizes the critical importance of science and applying the scientific method to everything, to society as well as nature. It firmly rejects any approaches that amount to applying and justifying the bankrupt and extremely harmful notion that the ends justify the means, and that truth is just an instrument of desired objectives rather than what it actually is, a correct reflection of objective reality. End quote. The new communism is in diametric opposition to the idea that if you want to make an omelet, you got to break some eggs, or these eat the rich guillotine revenge fantasies that fill the internet today. This is about a revolution to emancipate all humanity, which requires the overthrow of capitalism imperialism. As BA says earlier in the statement, quote, as any rational person can readily determine, the relatively small number of democratic socialists who are part of the Democratic Party are in no way radical socialists or really socialists at all, but are social democrats who are aiming not for the abolition of the capitalist system and its replacement by a socialist system, but for reforms within the capitalist system, which would not change or significantly affect its basic nature and functioning, end quote. And BA points people to the sweeping vision and the concrete blueprint for a radically new and emancipating society on the road to the final goal of a communist world and Lenny held this up a minute ago, in the Constitution for the New Socialist Republic in North America. And I cannot emphasize enough how visionary and path-breaking this document is. You can get it at revcom.us/socialist constitution. Now, in the statement, I'm going to read a section of the bold part in the statement in part 6, and it's a really deep paragraph. So people have the statement handy. I encourage you to read along. So in the statement, BA says, quote, it is a fact that nowhere else in any actual or proposed founding or guiding document of any government is there anything like not only the protection, but the provision for dissent and intellectual and cultural ferment that is embodied in this Constitution. While this has as its solid core a grounding in the socialist transformation of the economy with the goal of abolishing all exploitation and the corresponding transformation of the social relations and political institutions to uproot all oppression, and the promotion through the educational system and in society as a whole of an approach that will, quote, enable people to pursue the truth wherever it leads with a spirit of critical thinking and scientific curiosity. And in this way, to continually learn about the world and be better able to contribute to changing it in accordance with the fundamental interests of humanity. That's a quote from the Constitution, and BA goes on. All this will unchain and unleash a tremendous productive and social force of human beings, enabled and inspired to work and struggle together to meet the fundamental needs of the people, transforming society in a fundamental way and supporting and aiding revolutionary struggle throughout the world, aiming for the final goal of a communist world, free from all exploitation and oppression, while at the same time addressing the truly existential environmental and ecological crisis in a meaningful and comprehensive way, which is impossible under this system of capitalism imperialism, end quote. Impossible under this system, but possible through an actual revolution to bring into being a radically different system. Yes, a radically new world. Getting organized for this revolution is the mission of the Get Organized for an Actual Revolution tour. It's why we're here today in this seminar, and it's what we're inviting everyone who wants a better world to step into and to take responsibility for and to seriously engage. Now, BA speaks honestly and he speaks frankly. He says, the road to a better world is not and will not be an easy one. This cannot be accomplished without determined struggle. And yes, great sacrifice, end quote. But it is the only way out for humanity. And it is a very good thing that there is a way out. So I'm going to end with BA's closing words as a challenge and an invitation. Quote, in the face of the fascist juggernaut that is still threatening and gaining strength, large numbers of us who are deeply sickened and outraged by this, and who aspire to something much better, have raised and have rallied to the call that science and truth matters and must be our guide. Now let us be brave enough and bold enough to apply this in an unhindered way, determined to seek the truth and follow the truth wherever it leads. Overcoming all obstacles to this, including any cherished illusions and ingrained prejudices that run counter to reality and to scientifically established truth. Let us dare to act to make a reality of what science reveals as possible, a radically different and far better world and future for humanity.